Good evening, folks. Welcome to Poultry Keepers 360 Live. We are happy you joined us tonight, and we are happy to have Rebecca Lynch joining us tonight as a special guest. And we're going to be talking about Coturnix Quail. So it's going to be a fun show, interesting show. She's always full of loads of information and good things. Of course, we've got Karen with us tonight. We got Jeff with us tonight. So we got a pretty full house. So it's going to be fun. Let's go ahead and roll into this thing and get started. Rebecca, we appreciate you joining us tonight. I know you stay pretty busy with your business and doing other appearances on other shows, so we appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Oh, the pleasure is ours. The pleasure is ours. So, how about we start off, Rebecca? Just introduce yourself and share your background in raising quail.
Okay, well, my name is Rebecca Lynch, and I have Thieving Otter Farm in Middle Tennessee. And I have only been raising quail for about 4 years. But anybody that knows me knows that when I find something I like, I become completely obsessed with it and learn everything I can and quickly, gobble up as much information as possible. So I absolutely love quail and love working with them.
As much as you know about it, I would have thought you have been in it much longer than that. Trust me.
It does help that I had been breeding other poultry for a number of years before I got into quail, so I was able to apply a lot of that knowledge to it as well.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Hey, tell our folks how you got the name of Thieving Otter Farms. I know the first time I saw that, I thought, that's pretty cool, but it's pretty unusual.
It is unusual. It just so happens that we have wild river otters that come up the stream behind our house, and they have found our pond, and they routinely steal the fish out of our pond. And so we decided that that's okay, and we can buy more fish because I mean otters. Who doesn't love otters? So we have real live thieving otters, and I just thought that that would be a unique and memorable name for a farm.
Well, it's certainly unique and it's certainly memorable. I can't think of your name without thinking Thieving Otter Farms.
Hmm.
It's one of those names that kind of sticks with you. You are in Tennessee, right?
Yes, sir. I'm
You-
right north of Nashville on the Kentucky border.
Okay, so you're in Western Tennessee. I don't know why I was thinking you were in the
I'm
other
right in,
direction.
I'm actually right in the middle, right in middle Tennessee on the Kentucky border. Yep.
That is beautiful country up there. Beautiful country. How about telling us what initially drew you to raising Coturnix?
It was completely by accident. I had a chicken friend who had some Coturnix quail, and she decided that she was going to get out of them. And so she asked me, do you want a couple dozen quail? I'll give them to you for free. Just pay me for $40 for the cage. And I thought, well, if I don't like them, they taste good. So I thought I'd give them a try. And they were just the regular standard Pharaoh brown color. And I got them and thought, wow, these are actually really cool birds. They, they kind of sparked my interest. And then I started looking into them and found out that they come in all different colors. And I am kind of a nerd when it comes to genetics. So I started falling down the genetics rabbit hole of learning all about all the different colors and how they interact together. And the cool thing about Coturnix quail, and this is really why I got so caught up in them, is that you can work a breeding program in fast forward. Coturnix quail go from egg to egg, so hatch out and then go to laying an egg in as little as 12 weeks. So you can easily have 4 generations of quail in a year. So for somebody who likes working with breeding projects and seeing your work progress, it's awesome.
And that fast turnaround has always boggled my mind. I
Hmm.
can't think of very many critters that grow, mature that fast, and start reproducing that soon.
It's amazing. I've seen quail start laying at 5 weeks of age. Usually 6 to 8 weeks is, more common, but I've had them lay as early as 5 weeks.
Wow. Good grief. And I want to ask you, this is kind of getting off track here, but while I'm thinking about it, I want to ask you the size of a quail egg. How does that compare to, say, a medium-sized chicken egg?
Usually, so you're looking at around 10 to 14 grams for the size of your egg. And so most people use the gauge of about 3 quail eggs to 1 chicken egg.
Now, I know there's different sizes of Coturnix.
Mhm.
You lay a pretty much standard size egg, or is it the bigger birds laying bigger eggs too?
It's crazy. So that we have 3 sizes in Coturnix. They're all the same breed. They're just different sizes, different weight classes. So we do
Hmm.
have a Bantam. They're pretty rare, but they average around 4 ounces. And
Wow.
what's interesting is they can lay an egg that's almost the size of a standard quail.
Hmm.
It's amazing. And those little birds, they're great because they don't take up much space and they don't eat that much. So then you have your standard, and I have some standard quail that lay eggs as big as my jumbos. A standard quail averages about 8 ounces, and jumbos average around 12. So they can lay pretty good size egg, and a lot of it comes down to selecting for a larger egg, but also making sure you select for a bird that can pass that larger egg without having
Yeah.
issues.
And folks, don't confuse with the 6 and 8 ounces with the size of the egg. That's the size of the birds.
Right. Yep.
Hmm. How I know how you got into quail, but what attracted you to the point that you became so passionate about quail?
You know, part of that is just my personality. So I get a little obsessive with things. But honestly, before I was working with chicken genetics and actually creating a couple of my own breeds, that's been something I've been very passionate about. And then when I found quail, it gave me a chance to really stretch my breeding muscles. One of the first things that really got me hooked was I started with a line that had been imported from Germany and had a lot of issues. And other breeders had tried to correct those issues, but were unable to, and they would give up. And I got a hold of some, and they were atrocious. They had so many defects and so many problems, and I made it a goal to fix it. And it was a challenge that I just felt I had to meet. And It took me about 2.5 years, which in quail time, that's quite a few generations.
Yeah.
um, but now I got them they averaged around 4 to 5 ounces when I first started with them. They were really small and weak, failure to thrive. And I've got some that are around 11 ounces now. And they don't have the defects that they did before. It's great now. Instead of having to worry about, um, you know, curled toes. We have problems with like a clenched fist with
Hmm.
quail, and splay legs and just weak birds. Now I'm pretty much selecting for color. It's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You've made a lot of progress in not too long a time period. So you,
Yes, and that's, I think part of it is being part of that. Right now we're living in a time of instant gratification.
yes.
And honestly, working with quail is almost instant gratification. They hatch out in 17 days, and they start laying in about 6 weeks. So really quickly, I can progress through that breeding program and get somewhere.
And we probably got some folks here who are not that familiar with quail, but describe the color of a regular Coturnix quail. And then I know we've got a fairly new gene to quail that has popped up for eggshell color as well.
Yeah, the it's kind of hard to describe, but the wild type is shades of brown, black. There's some cream color in there as well. They are sexually dimorphic, so you can tell the males from the females. The males will have a reddish colored breast, a rusty breast, and the females have a spotted breast. They are a dark bird, and on their back they'll have like cream colored stripes almost. It's called pinning. And then from there are, oh goodness, so many different other genes, mutations that have happened. For some reason, quail tend to get color mutations fairly fairly often compared to like chickens. And so new color mutations happen pretty frequently, and sometimes the challenge is a mutation will happen in another country and they'll be working with it and you'll just eyeball that, oh, I'd love to work with it. And so there's been some importing and exporting of various genes. And then along with the plumage genes, there's also, like you mentioned, eggshell color genes. So the celadon blue eggshell gene has been around for a while. It's just a little hard to work with as it's a recessive gene. So it's kind of different, in chickens you can, have a brown layer and a blue layer and get a green egger and all that stuff. And it doesn't quite work the same in quail. So it poses a whole different challenge.
You were talking about the color of the birds. Gosh, I had Coturnix many years ago, and back then you had two color choices basically.
Mhm.
You had a wild type and you had a white.
Yep. And now we have silver and Andalusian, and there's a red gene that's called rue, and there's blue and lavender, and there's all these different pattern mutations, pansy and sparkly. And the cool thing is that most of these, depending on what locus the gene is on, can coexist together. And so one of my colleagues actually did the math and found there are about 170,000 different gene combinations you can have.
Whoa.
So, and that's probably one of the reasons why I enjoy quail so much. It became a kind of like one of those Pokemon or whatever. Got to collect them all, and it's been one of my goals to have as many genes as I possibly can, and then study how they interact with each other. So fascinating.
I know this has been a year or so ago, maybe longer than that. You showed me a picture of some quail colors I was totally blown away by.
Mhm.
One is a black, and I know you've gone a long way to perfecting that color.
Yes, sir.
And another one was, to me, it looked buff, but I think you told me it was something else. It was very
Yeah,
light blonde color.
that was probably a blue fawn.
Yes, that's right.
Yep, that is a very pretty color combination. Yeah, there's so many different combinations of both pattern and color. And the black that you referred to, that was that one that I worked on for so long and specialized in. And I actually not only studied, worked on perfecting that line, but I also studied what made the bird black, because this was something new to our country and nobody had ever really studied it and pulled it apart and figured out the gene combinations that made that. So I turned that into a breeding project and actually found a brand new gene that nobody knew about. So we found that there is a let's see, there's fawn, fee, extended brown, and the new gene, which since I discovered it, I get to name it. So I'm excited about that. I haven't released the name yet, but that will be. I'm completing my testing and hope to release that name later this year.
Very, very cool. Very
Mhm.
cool. What are some of or just highlight, if you would, some of the key benefits of raising quail both for the beginners and the more experienced?
Sure. Well, for the more experienced breeder, it's exactly what I said. It gives you a chance to kind of stretch your breeding muscles, so to speak, to work with a breeding program and see it either work or not work. So you can test something out. If you want to see how many generations of inbreeding you can do before something happens, or if you want to see what are the effects if I cull for this or select for that, you can see it super fast. So that would be something great for the experienced breeder. Chickens just don't mature very quickly. So it
True.
gives you something else to do. Um, for the beginner, they're fairly easy to keep. They can be kept in a pretty small area. They don't take up as much room as, say, chickens or turkeys. They don't eat as much, and they don't make a whole lot of noise. So there's actually a lot of people that live in like HOAs or in towns that don't allow you to have chickens, that don't have a problem with quail because nobody really even knows you have them. So they're pretty easy. The only challenge is that they're some people want to get them for their kids, and these birds don't particularly like being handled a whole lot. So if somebody does get them and wants to have them as a family type project, you want to make sure you get them from a breeder that breeds for temperament and breeds for a more docile bird. Otherwise, they're just going to be flighty and aggressive to each other.
Hey, you're talking about temperament. I know when I got mine, boy, they were wild birds
Yes.
and aggressive towards each other if you
Hmm.
didn't watch it.
Yes, and that can be a big that is one of the challenges with raising quail. They can be aggressive towards each other, sometimes brutally so. But there's ways that you can get around that. One of the ways is, like I mentioned, buying from a breeder who actually pays attention to breeding for temperament. I'm somebody that I will not tolerate a bird that is aggressive to another bird. I don't care how pretty it is. If it is beating up other birds or just chasing them around and harassing them, it's no use to me. So that also, if I pick up a bird and it won't calm down and I feel its heart racing and it's flapping and just won't, that's also something I don't want. So
Mm.
I've been selectively breeding for calmer lines that are more docile. Along with that, there's certain things that you need to do to meet their needs. So I don't cull a bird unless I know that I've already been meeting all of its needs first. So one of those is cage spacing. So with these birds, if you give them too much room, they will set up territories. And sometimes, if there's enough room for territories, but not enough room where they can stay out of each other's territories, they can get pretty nasty to each other. So generally, you want to have about 3 birds per square foot for jumbos, and 3 to 4 birds per square foot for standards. And that sounds like you're just squishing them in, but honestly, I've witnessed it over and over. They're happier. They don't set up territories, and they do just fine. Um, the other thing is these guys get hangry. They get if they do not have a source of food all the time, food and water, they will go after each other. So they are, I know that with chickens that, Jeff recommends, measuring your feed. And I do that with my chickens. But when it comes to my quail, I make sure they have food all the time. So those are the main things. Also, your roux to hen ratio. You want to make sure that you don't have too many roosters for too few hens, because they can get a little cranky towards each other. Although I've also seen some hens that were not very nice. So it's a lot of it is selection, but also making sure you meet their needs.
So, what
Well,
is your hen to rooster ratio? Like chickens, it's like 8 or 10 to 1.
Mhm.
Is it about the same for the quail?
For quail, you're looking at generally about 1 to 5. Now, it that's the easy answer. If you want to get more complicated, if you have jumbos that are where the males are larger and a little bit lazier, you might have to increase that ratio a little bit. If you have standards and the male's pretty randy and running around and getting his thing done, you can go easily 1 to 6. So it just kind of depends on what lines you're working with and their activity level, and also the size of the cage. Some people use an aviary setting, where they have lots of room to run around. In those settings, you don't want to have 4 birds per square foot. That would get kind of nasty pretty quick. Those you want to have fewer birds, so about a half a bird per square foot, or 1 bird for 2 square feet, or even more room than that. But in those cases, since the male would have to chase around the females and go quite a ways to get to them, you might increase the number of roosters that you have.
Let's talk about, and this is a good question for you and Jeff, but let's talk about quail nutrition, feeding
Okay.
quail. What
Yeah.
works?
So, because quail grow so darn rapidly, I mentioned that they go from egg to laying in about 6 weeks. They do need a higher protein feed for that rapid growth. So, generally, we start them out on 28 to 30% starter feed, and we use a turkey and game bird starter generally. And then from there, I start feeding. I personally go to a 17% chicken layer crumble and supplement with the Fertrell Poultry Show and breeder supplement, just to kind of give it a little added boost. Jeff, what are your recommendations for quail?
Um, I'm big on amino acids, and everybody listening knows that. So if I could get the right amino acid levels, you could start your quail on a 26%. But you're not typically going to get the right amino acid levels. I think that's why a lot of quail people are starting out 28 and 30% proteins, because they don't necessarily understand the amino acid part of it. And I think the biggest deficiency I see with the quail folks that I've worked with is everything I have data-wise or research-wise shows that quail require a much higher fat content in their feed. They should be up around 8 or 9%, and most feeds are lucky to make 4%.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I'd like to see a 26, 28% starter. I like to see an in-between phase of 20 to 23% protein during the, so 3 weeks on the higher protein, 3 to 4 weeks on the, lower protein, and then switching over to the layer feed. I actually like a 20% layer feed for the quail. Depends on the quail, and the size of the egg, I think, is going to be part of that as well.
Sure.
So your larger egg layers are going to need the higher protein to support the egg size.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can get the fat levels up, I think the quail would actually eat less feed and be satisfied more quicker. But the commercial feeds that I've looked at, everybody's, when I did the thing for Coturnix Corner, and the people that reached out to me and said, "Hey, can you look at my quail feed?" I never saw the fat level where it needed to be, or the amino acid levels. So,
Sure.
Jeff, what are the proper amino acids for quail?
in that starter feed, I'd like to see 1.6, 1.7 lysine, somewhere around a 0.7, 0.75 on methionine. Threonine ought to be up around 0.85 to 0.9. So we're getting to the place now with science that we know I could basically build a feed with just adding synthetic amino acids, and I could start quail on a 20% protein if I added all the right key amino acids. But it's not it's not really an option, for anybody out there, beyond the university level, doing the research. I mean, it is possible, but it's just not realistic.
Okay,
So-
I have to ask though. I know this is baser than what y'all are talking about, but Larry's saying that the quail eat more than an Orpington. Is that really true? You
I
have
don't think
both,
so.
yeah.
But it's kind of hard for me to judge since I have quite a few more quail than I do chickens.
Yeah.
But no, they don't eat much at all.
Okay, just checking. Yeah.
Mm-mm-mm.
Well,
What about
okay, so let's just one add on here. All poultry, quail, chickens, turkeys, ducks, whatever, all poultry and all fowl eat for their energy requirement. So going back to the fat level that I was talking about, that's pure energy. So when that fat level gets up, or when the energy level is where it's supposed to be for the bird, they're going to eat less. So, if you're adding like the breeder supplement and the oil to get it to stick, then you're bumping up that energy level considerably. And Thomas may want to consider adding oil to his feed if he's not at the right, fat levels, and see if they don't calm down and eat less. Because there's no need for them to eat as much as an Orpington, which would be 5 or 6 ounces per
Right.
quail. The feed to their body weight ratio isn't correct. And so that tells me that the feed's not where it ought to be for in Thomas's case. But do you think they eat more because they're a little bit more active, hyperactive, almost to the point of hyperactive? Like you were talking about, you can't get their heartbeat to calm down. They're just way more energetic kind of than a regular chicken.
Yeah, they do spend a lot of time just moving around. Just they don't roost. They don't really, my lines are a little bit more calm, so I do see them just kind of laying down chilling sometimes. But most of the time, they're active. They're moving around. They're checking stuff out. So it could be, that they are quite a bit more active than a chicken.
I
You're
remember
making me
one-
want to get some just so I can experiment with them. And
I'll send you some.
no, I don't have time. Okay.
she can fix you up, Jeff.
No,
And
I know
Thomas is
she
right. It is
would.
around 2 ounces of feed a day for a quail. Yeah.
Yeah. And based on their body weight, that seems to be a lot to me.
Hmm.
Because that would be what a bantam chicken would eat. Like a 1.5 pound bantam chicken, quail being roughly half that size. So, now I need to find somebody who's willing to be a guinea pig and let me play with quail feed, feeding experiments. But Carrie will do it. I'll get Carrie to do it.
I'll do some.
Okay.
Y'all are terrible. Rebecca, you talked a little bit about birds per square foot.
Mhm.
What other housing requirements should someone wanting to get into quail think about?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question and super important. So, a couple of things, especially coming from if you're used to raising other poultry. So we know that we need to predator proof our pens for chickens, but quail can fall prey to predators that we don't necessarily think so much about with chickens. They can fall prey very easily to snakes and to rats. So if your quail pen is outdoors, you want to make sure that you're using hardware cloth and other means to protect them. So it's not just the raccoons and all that stuff, because they also think that quail are tasty, but those smaller predators as well. The other interesting thing about quail is, as Jeff and I were talking about their activity levels, they can be kind of flighty. And so they need to be kept in cages that is recommended 8 to 10 inches high, um, no more than 12 inches, or over 6 feet. So anything in between, the quail will flush, they'll fly up abruptly and can actually break their own necks. Quail are really good at unaliving themselves. So we have to
Uh,
plan for that.
And one thing I learned about Coturnix is they have a very different flight pattern compared to a bob and white, where bob whites kind of tend to start out and then rise up.
Mm-hmm.
Coturnix just straight up and then
Yeah, they
land
kind of go
along.
straight up and then they don't fly very well. So then they end up kind of coming back down pretty quickly. And then about the time you get close and put your hands on them, they fly up again. So they're a lot easier to catch though. And then the other thing to keep in mind, a lot of people will go, well, can I release them in at my house and make a wild group of quail running around, or they'll ask if they can free range them like chickens. And no, unfortunately, these are Japanese quail and they're pretty domesticated. And if you turn them loose, they kind of just wander off into the woods and get eaten by things. So they don't roost. They don't really do well at coming back home and going into a coop or anything like that. So, and then as far as releasing them, since they're they're not a native species, one, it would be illegal, and two, they just don't live very long. So probably don't want to do that.
Yeah. What about somebody who's just starting out?
Mhm.
What advice or tips would you have for them for setting up a successful breeding program?
Well, the first thing I would want to ask is what is your purpose for having these birds? Are you raising them for meat? They're a great source of meat. Are you raising them for eggs? Do you want both? Are they pets? Or are you going to use them for feeding your dog, because they can be used for like raw feeding and stuff. So what how you're going to set them up and what birds you're going to purchase would depend on what your goals are. If you're wanting them for meat, you definitely want to go with a jumbo line that's going to get bigger. If you're wanting them for eggs only and you don't care about meat, then maybe those standard birds that don't eat as much as the jumbos and don't take up as much room might be a better choice. And then probably, because we did talk about that aggression and how flighty they can be, the best thing I can say is buy from a breeder who breeds for temperament, and selects carefully for that, because especially if you're wanting to do this with your family and you have small children, it can be kind of sad when you walk out and they've scalped each other. So
Yes.
kids don't want to see that. So yeah, that would be my biggest advice is find a breeder that actually does selective breeding and doesn't, a lot of people just throw them in a cage and just let them do their thing.
Are there any challenges or common issues that breeders should be aware of in raising quail?
I would say the biggest thing is the aggression. The other thing is, people often focus on, if they're raising jumbos, they want a bigger bird, bigger bird, bigger bird, and they're selecting for weight, but
Mhm.
they're not selecting for the frame that's going to hold that weight. So just as in Cornish cross, where they get to a certain point and then their legs give out, the same can happen with jumbo quail. So it's really important to make sure that you're selecting for a large frame, and good structure, and not just put them on a scale and pick that way.
And that's something we see regularly,
Mhm.
as you know, in chickens.
Absolutely. And then along with that is egg size. People are, constantly wanting bigger eggs without selecting for the width of the pelvic bones and making sure those eggs can pass appropriately.
And folks, and you may not have known, and I didn't know until the last couple of years or so, but for chickens and turkeys and ducks and geese and the poultry most of us are more familiar with, we have a standard of perfection we go by.
Mhm.
But there is now one for Coturnix Quail, which I think is a good move.
We are working on it. So there's not one that's published yet, but that you're absolutely right. There's standards of perfections for so many different birds, but there hadn't been one for quail. And so just last year, we formed the American Coturnix Breeders Association. And one of our main goals is to write a standard of perfection. So that way there is something that people can breed by, and eventually have shows. That would be fun too. The big thing is we don't want to rush to that. In some livestock, it's about the production of the animal and what that animal is used for. And then in some things, such as chickens and like the dog world, it's more about how pretty it is. And sometimes a utility creature is very different from the show creature. So we're trying to make sure that we contact actual production breeders around the world who have lines that are used in commercial aspects, who study the best frame for the bird, and how to select for a bird that is the best producer, and make our SOP towards that and not just feather color.
Good. I think that's important.
Mm-hmm.
A little earlier, you were talking about how long it takes a quail egg to hatch.
Yeah.
But could you kind of walk us through the incubation process and what you think are best practices?
Sure. Well, just like with a chicken egg, it starts with selection of the egg. I make sure that I'm looking for any defects in the egg. I don't want cracks. I don't want anything that's, kind of wonky shaped. I don't want anything that's too big or too small. I don't want to set double yolkers or anything. So I'm looking for consistency in size and shape, looking for shell quality. So once I select my eggs, they are incubated for 17 days. Day 14 is lockdown. So it's pretty fast. And generally, temperature is going to be 99.5 degrees, and run them at incubation around 45% humidity or less. A lot of people are doing dry incubation now, if their ambient humidity will allow it. And then on lockdown, we continue with the same temperature, excuse me, and increase to 60 to 65% humidity. And they're out and running around, and they're super fast. You got to be careful when you open up your hatching baskets, because
you do
out of them. So yeah, generally on day 17 or day 18, they're up and running around.
Yeah, I think they come out of those eggs in high gear.
Oh, they hit the ground running. It's crazy.
For somebody,
do you weigh the eggs? And is there a way to candle them? So you were talking about you don't set double yolkers. Their shells look like their eggshells look like they're much thicker. So I didn't know if you're going to get a whole lot of light transparency through there, but you can candle them then?
So as far as it's more eyeballing them for me. I know that plenty of people will weigh the eggs. I generally, just from eyeballing, I'm selecting eggs that are around 14 grams. And if I see an egg that is oversized or super long, those tend to be the double yolkers. So I don't set any of those. If I'm selecting just regular sized eggs, they're not. And then as far as candling, if somebody wants to candle, it's recommended to do it either around like day 10, if you're wanting to pull eggs early, or, I will candle at day 14 when I'm doing lockdown. And I usually only candle if I need to make extra room in the hatching basket. But with them, you're not looking for veins in embryo, kind of, as you would with a chicken. It's more, if you shine your light on it and the light passes completely through the egg and the whole egg lights up, it's a dud. If you can see the air cell and then the rest of the egg is dark, then there's at least something, there's an embryo in it. Can't tell if it's alive or not.
Yeah, I just noticed that the shell thickness was quite a bit more. Mm-hmm. So I didn't think you were going to see that same transparency that you would as a chicken egg.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Absolutely.
If some of our listeners out there are thinking about, this sounds pretty good, I think I want to start a quail operation. What are some of the approximate startup costs associated with doing that?
Well, since their housing is not really large, I guess it depends on how many quail you wanted. But if, most people start out with maybe, a dozen to 20 quail. And you can easily make your own cage, with some lumber and hardware cloth for, $100 or less. Or if you want to go commercial, like with a commercial cage, those can go up to, $800 to $1,000. So it just kind of depends on how much, how handy you are and how much time you have to build something. As far as brooders, these little guys are little. So a lot of people will just use a plastic tote and a heat lamp. Doesn't require a whole lot of specialized brooding. And a bag of feed will last you a long time. So,
It will.
yeah, they actually do make for quail. If you're buying your feed from a local feed store or stuff, they do make them in smaller bags, because if you're doing a small batch of quail, one bag will get you through the entire brood. So,
What about the cost of the birds? First, would you recommend somebody start with birds or hatching eggs?
it just depends. If you're starting with live birds, you can look at the birds, you can see any defects, you can see their health and go from there. With hatching eggs, a lot of beginners want to start with beginner incubators and shipped eggs. And that's great if you go in with the expectation that you're using shipped eggs, which can, be a gamble based on how they're handled during the shipping process. And a beginner incubator is going to give you beginner results and not necessarily, a 95% hatch rate. That all being said, the eggs themselves are generally fairly inexpensive. So you can buy quite a few of them and, kind of offset the loss that you might have with shipping. So jumbo brown eggs, that's kind of one of the most common lines, and they're usually usually around $1 or maybe a little bit more per egg. So not a huge investment.
Okay. And I know you have a commercial operation, so I'm just going to throw this out there. If somebody wants to start raising quail and try to turn $1 on them,
Sure.
what size of operation do you think they need to do that?
It kind of depends. And what it depends on is, do you want to specialize? A lot of people will specialize in those jumbo browns that I was talking about. That's the most common. But also, because they are the most common, they are the least profitable. Anybody, people all over the place sell them. So if you're going to make a profit on those, you have to have a lot of birds, because you have to have bigger sales to, try to get people to, you have to be able to sell more eggs to try to make a profit. Whereas if you specialize in a certain color variety that might be a little bit more rare, you can sell those eggs for a lot more per dozen and, raise fewer birds and be able to make a little bit more profit. So, with those big jumbo browns, they sell, people love them and they'll buy them by hundreds of eggs. And I've had even some people ask me for 1,000 or more eggs at a time. But that means a whole lot of cage space and a whole lot of feed and a lot of birds to take care of. So it kind of, it just depends on which avenue you want to go to.
How, and we were talking about this a little bit before we opened the show, but how has your quail operation grown and evolved over the years?
Well, as we mentioned, I got started with just a handful of birds that were given to me and never dreamed I would become like a quail queen. So, um, I started out with those few birds, and then as I learned, I obtained more birds. And oh, I hear a kitty cat. So, um, but I started out with various different colors and started really simple. I was just selling on eBay, a variety mix. And at first it was, oh my goodness, I made a sale. That was pretty cool. And then next thing you know, I was actually paying for feed and growing the number of birds that I had and starting to specialize in different colors. And I think it was really the black Coturnix line that I had that kind of put me on the map. People, that was something that was highly sought after. And my name started getting around. And as I learned more, I'm a natural educator. I love to share what I know. And so the more I knew, the more I'd share, and people started learning that they could come to me for questions and stuff. And those turned into people that were interested in buying from me because they knew that, I would put the work and effort into the birds. So I went from having about, I think I started with maybe 20 birds, and now I have about 2,000. That's a guess because once you get into that many birds, you kind of lose track. And I'm currently looking to expand this year within the next few months to about 6,000 birds, and venturing into some other avenues for quail and what I'll be offering.
That's pretty awesome. Um,
Yep.
for somebody that wants to learn more about quail,
Mhm.
where could they turn for resources, or are there? I'm assuming there's Coturnix groups on the internet on Facebook. What are some that you would recommend they check into?
Absolutely. Um, so Coturnix Corner has a really great Facebook group, and there are people who have never even held a Coturnix quail, don't know anything about them, that come there to seek information, all the way up to the best breeders in the world in that group. And along with that group, there is a website, coturnixcorner.com. Then that, again, is a host to a number of very experienced people that are happy to answer questions about quail. And there's Coturnix Corner YouTube channel. And there's tons and tons of informational videos. So those are the three main places that I would recommend. And then if you're a breeder and you're wanting to learn about genetics and breeding, or you're wanting to start your own business, there's actually a coaching program called Quailology. And so that's ccquail.com. And you can learn all about being a breeder. That website is about to change over to quailology.com. We're currently working on a website. It's not my program, but I'm helping build the website. But those are fantastic resources. And I will say, having been in I've been in the dog world, I've been in the chicken world, I've been in all different, worlds. The quail world is kind of special. There's a lot of really, really nice people that just want to help everybody out and share information. And it's very similar to what I see in Poultry Keepers 360. You have a really nice community of people in there that are just helping each other out, and it's
Yes.
wonderful. Absolutely.
Very good. Um, I just thought of something else, and it just immediately went
I have
away.
that same problem.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I know. Um, where can people connect with you? How can they find you?
So I am, as we mentioned, I am through Thieving Otter Farm. So I have my website, thievingotterfarm.com. I have a Facebook page for my farm, so that you can find me on Facebook. And I am happy to answer questions at any time. Facebook Messenger, if you're on Facebook, is the best way to get a hold of me. or you can email me at thievingotterfarm@gmail.com. I'm always happy to answer questions. If you couldn't tell tonight, I love to talk about quail.
So I wanted to go back to resources just for a second, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you prioritize? Okay, so I'm on Coturnix Corner on the Facebook group, and I don't want people to get a lot of misinformation. So there's people sharing opinions and romantic ideas about like feeding and managing their quail. But
Sure.
then there are the realists who are going to give you really good hard cold facts, right? And I think you want to start out with some really good, information
Mhm.
before you start going over to the romantic side of quail. Um, I just, I think there's a lot of people that have train wrecks because they don't set up their aviary correctly, or there's a lot of pitfalls starting any fowl, not just quail or chickens or whatever. But so would you say quailology? Is it? I mean, where do you start? And in Terry's show, Coturnix Corner on YouTube, I think he filtered out, I think, a lot of the more romantic side of it.
Mhm.
It seemed like Terry had really good information. So I'm just, where should people start for real proper information before they start getting crazy?
I would say if you're just wanting to, if you're a beginner, you're just wanting to get into it, have some quail, for your family, maybe meet some meat and eggs, then Coturnix Corner YouTube channel is the way to go. And you can, search for various, videos on quail housing, or, stocking recommendations, or what color is what. If you really want to get into breeding quail and sustaining a line, then quailology is the way to go. And there's two different programs right now. There is the colors and genetics side of it, and breeding, and then he actually has a business coaching program, and that is really good. And it's run by Michael Rose from Southwest Game Birds, who is the best quail breeder in the country and is hugely successful. I can tell you that I, on a regular basis, I will think I know what I'm talking about, and Michael will knock me down a few pegs, in a very, very nice way. Will inform me that, in fact, no, it's this way. Oh, wow, I had no idea. So, if you want to learn from the best, then that's where you want to go. And I'm enrolled in it, and I just love it. I've learned some really great stuff there. But for just the beginner, there's no reason to necessarily have to pay a monthly fee and stuff like that. You can go to Coturnix Corner YouTube channel and find beginner stuff.
I mean, that's where I would start, is probably with Terry's stuff on Coturnix Corner on YouTube. And if that sucks you in well enough, then think about quailology.
Absolutely.
Just be careful, because Facebook groups, there's plenty of people providing opinion only, right, without any strong basis to it. So that was the only thing I want people to filter out reliable resources before their head gets filled full of gunk from part-timers and backyarders and whatever. So
this is very true, and I will say that I do post a lot of educational things on my Thieving Otter Farm page. So I do try to help out that way, and I'm happy to answer questions. But it may not be what somebody is looking for at that time. I might be talking about a color or something when they're looking at housing. So yeah, probably the YouTube channel be the best way to go.
Very good. That winds up my questions here. But Karen, I believe we have some questions
We have
from
a
our
few.
listeners.
We have a few here. So Thomas, who's very interested, wants to know exactly how you manage to raise so many different types of of quail.
Yes. So I know kind of the rule is it's hard to be a good breeder if you're raising a bazillion different breeds. So I definitely agree with that. I raise one breed of quail, but it's lots and lots of different colors. And I will tell you, it's a lot of record keeping, and I handle every single bird and I select every bird carefully. I have different pens for different colors. I do web cutting for identification and have spreadsheets. It's kind of like the toe punch for chickens. And I have spreadsheets for what web goes to which color or which cage or whatever. Yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
I'm glad you talked about the web cutting because as you were going there, I just wrote down a quick note. How do you tell them apart?
Yeah,
What's your bird ID? But
it's
that works.
it's pretty. Yes, it does. I use cuticle scissors,
Hmm.
and I just notch a V out of their web as I pull them out of the hatching baskets. I hatch them in individual baskets according to what variety they are, and cut the webs and have a little spreadsheet and know exactly who is who for the rest of their life.
Very cool. Karen, we got another one.
Yes. I cannot pronounce any of those words there.
Terry Schofield, yes.
Yes.
He did not discover the Celadon gene. So Perry got his birds from a university. So he was the first person outside of a university to have some certain genes. And then those genes were imported to the US. And it was actually Kansas City Quail Farm, if I'm correct. Now, I could have my facts wrong. But as far as I know, it was Kansas City Quail Farm that discovered the first Celadon layer. One hen laying this blue egg. And from there, all of the Celadons in the world came from that one bird. Yeah. So technically, the bird, the line originated from Perry, which originated from the university, but the bird did not start laying blue until it got to Kansas City Quail Farm, as far as I know.
Interesting.
And I think you sort of covered this, but I'm just going to throw it out there as a specific. How do you choose to feed them without a ton of waste?
I actually use a no waste feeder. I tried tons of different feeders, and I finally found one that works. I hang it a little high. So that was something I learned from Jeff, to hang it a little high. And then it's got these nice little fins in it so they can't shake their head and throw the feed everywhere. And it's kind of deep as far as where the feed sits, so they can't scoop it out. And that was a game changer. Once I started using those, my feed bill went way down.
Rebecca, I know you also sell quail feeders. Is that the kind that you sell?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yep. That's the only one I'd put my name on.
No, you sell all the other kinds you tried and didn't like. Just get rid of them.
Nope.
All right. So, is there a standard of perfection, whatever they call it, for quail in other countries?
I believe Germany has a standard of perfection. Okay. I know that in some other countries there are some quail shows. Australia had a quail show where they had kind of a loose standard of perfection. But I don't think that I think Germany may be the only one that has one that I know of that has one written out as a guideline.
All right. And then I think this is our last one. And some people have answered this in the comments, but have you ever tried a trail quail tractor?
Say that 3 times fast.
Yeah, I couldn't say it once. So, or what do you feel about that?
Yeah, I personally have not tried one. And I know that, some people have. The hard thing is having the flooring where you can move the quail without them falling through it, but also get the benefit of being in a tractor. So I imagine they would probably, get manure on it pretty quickly and stuff like that. But it's not something I've researched a whole lot.
Would they need a floor? Is there a reason why you couldn't have them on the ground? If the
Um,
tractor moved daily,
yeah.
that's why I'm wondering why you need a floor.
Well, I'm wondering how you would move the tractor without them scattering.
Okay, I mean they would be totally enclosed in the shelter,
Mhm.
Yeah,
in the
but
tractor,
they're
so they
so
can't.
small. Like when you move it, like unless your ground is like an ice rink, like how do you?
Yeah, I see that you'd want really flat ground, and I, I don't know. I'm just asking because I'm very familiar with different chicken tractors,
Mhm.
so I get that part of it. I have no idea about the behavior of quail in a tractor. I would think that once they're big enough, towards adult size, that they could be trained to be moved on grass or out on pasture.
Yeah, I think if the grass was short enough and you didn't have to lift it super high to move it, it might be okay. But since they're so small, I think as soon as you lift it, they go out the sides, and then you'd be chasing quail.
Yeah, most people drag it, so there's not actually any lifting.
Yeah, I got it. Okay.
They just kind of skid along the ground, so they never really lose contact with the ground.
Okay. Okay.
So that's why that was a really good question. That would be good for somebody to try as well. And then you said height on an aviary not to exceed 6 feet.
No, if you're doing an aviary, you want 6 feet or higher.
Okay.
And that way they can fly up and not hurt themselves on the ceiling. And then cages are 8 to 10 inches, no more than 12.
Hmm.
And I have to agree with that comment there that quail are stubborn and won't move with the tractor. Quail are not, it's not necessarily stubborn. It's just they're not very bright. And like I said, they find all different creative ways to unalive themselves.
See, and I'm really curious if Thomas tried pulling the tractor. So I found with certain birds that if you go behind it and you were to push the tractor, they would want to go away from you. Whereas if you're pulling the tractor, would they stay at the back and you'd end up running them over? I don't know. Again,
I
I don't.
know
I'm asking naively.
when I walk into my aviary, my bird, like I have to be careful because I will step on my birds.
Okay.
And if I set a bag of food down, I have to be careful because I will squish birds. So
So yours don't run away from you necessarily.
no,
They stay.
no.
But you've
Now
also bred for that demeanor,
it's
to
true.
be calmer, and I've listened to all the comments on the Coturnix Corner Facebook group, and everybody, some are talking about being flighty, nervous, hard to handle, and other people, of course, are breeding for that calmness and a better demeanor like you are. But so the only question I haven't asked tonight, right, is
Oh boy.
what? No, it's an easy question. Easy question.
Okay, okay.
As a professional eater, right? Um, if you were doing a jumbo Coturnix, what would you expect the yield after you process it? How much meat's left or how much is left on the carcass? So I need to know how many quail I have to prepare for dinner.
Okay, so I haven't weighed them. I'm so darn busy. I don't have a chance to eat my quail very often because it takes time to, it doesn't take, it only takes a couple of minutes to process a quail. It's pretty fast, but still, I would say generally, my boyfriend is a big guy and he would probably eat 4 of them. I would probably only eat 2. So
So
anywhere from 2 to 4.
there's probably not more than 2 or 3 ounces of meat. Is that on the jumbos or is that on the standards?
A jumbo is a good, they're a good 12 to 16 ounces. So
Live weight.
you're gonna
Live
get
weight. Yeah.
quite a bit.
Probably half, maybe not quite half, but close to half. So,
Yeah.
well, for anybody who's looking at them as a meat supply, that's why I'm asking the question. Is
Mhm.
I would think you'd want more of the jumbos if you're trying
Yes,
to produce meat, right, versus eggs,
absolutely.
right?
This is
Um,
this is
dual
right where
purpose. Which one? You going with a standard jumbo or probably not a Bantam?
Correct. A dual purpose, you'd want a jumbo.
The
Yeah,
jumbo. Okay.
they tend to lay bigger eggs. Not always, but they tend to.
I was right there with Thomas. I'm like, you either want a giant tractor that's 6 feet tall, or you're moving around a tractor that's the size of a piece of paper standing up.
Yeah.
This is true.
I mean, it's
I'd be really curious to see how they do in like a Siskovich tractor. So it doesn't have a solid top on it. It's covered with a, like a poly tarp type thing. So there's not necessarily something for them to break their neck on when they fly up, right? So it's not a hard top.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be curious. And that's a 5 foot by 10 foot structure, so you could put quite a few quail in there, and it's a small enough manageable size. Most people can move it without a whole lot of difficulty. So
So I'm not familiar with that kind of tractor. What do you do for predator proofing with that kind of top?
we just don't. I mean, it's a heavy duty like billboard type tarping, so it's not a predator problem necessarily. Them coming through, and then the sides are 18 inches high, and those all have wire mesh around them. And it's a 1x4 type framework. So you have good wire meshing at the bottom, but the top is covered with a semi-translucent, lets a little bit of light through. But it's a heavy duty plastic, and I haven't seen anybody with issues with that as far as predators. But anything's possible. Not from hawks and owls. They don't bother it. So maybe coyotes. I don't know. It's a visible barrier to them. So I've never seen anybody, any wildlife challenge it. Now, if you're in bear country, that's a whole other story. No claims on bear, but your typical fox, raccoon, possum, skunk, those sort of things. I haven't heard anybody report a predator problem. Same with hawks and owls.
Sure.
But
I had an interesting, just as a little side story. I would sometimes go out and I have an aviary for my extra quail. And sometimes if I just want to decompress, I'll go out and I'll sit with my birds. It's just kind of fun to watch them move around, grab a bucket, sit with the birds. And all of a sudden they just froze. And they didn't move and they didn't make a noise. And I was like, what, am I in the Matrix? Like what happened here? And a hawk was flying along the side of the aviary trying to get in. And it was a good 10 minutes before those birds moved again after that hawk left.
Wow.
It was fascinating.
Wow. Well, it's fascinating that they still have the instinct to do that.
That's true.
That, as far removed as they were from the wild quail, that they still had that predator sense to just, lock up and not move like that. But
they saw it before I did.
Yep. Now, do you have any issues with hawks and owls with your other fowl?
I did until I got emus and pigs in the pen that I have one big open pen and my other pens are covered. And we had goats in it and everything was fine. And then when we got rid of the goats, then it became a hawk party. And then now we have a couple emus and some cooney pigs and no more problems. So, yeah, that solved that.
That's interesting. Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I learned from a larger laying operation, outdoor type, pastured laying operation in Oregon. He was losing, 3 to 6 birds a day to hawks, owls, other airborne predators. Well, he's got 3,000 chickens, right? So
okay, yeah.
So he simply got a styrofoam coyote decoy from Amazon for $80.
Mm-hmm.
And he just moves it around. So every like once a week or every few days, he puts it in a different position or a different location. Hasn't had an issue since. Okay.
It's interesting. I spoke to a falconer. I've got so my culls have to go somewhere, and I can't eat that much quail. So I have a falconer that buys frozen birds from me, and I also supply a raptor rehabilitation center where they're helping out the hawks and owls. And so I asked this falconer when I was having this hawk problem, do you have any tips? Like, how do I keep these guys gone? And they said they really hate great horned owls, and that if I would get some owl decoys and put them out, that would help. But like you said, with moving the coyote decoy, he did say, I need to make it different. I need to move it. I need to paint it. There are actually some that are solar powered where the heads move and their eyes glow and they'll hoot. So, but he did say that they're extremely smart and they will figure out a fake decoy in no time.
Yep. Well, if you use a great horned owl decoy, then you're not going to keep the owls away. So,
That's
if you ever had an owl problem, then whereas with the coyote, he hasn't had an eagle, hawk, or any other raptor, issue
Yeah.
since.
And in both cases, you have to give your chickens Prozac because they're watching these decoys and having anxiety issues.
His chickens didn't care. They didn't bother them a bit. But yeah, a more heritage type chicken probably would need
Right,
Prozac. Yeah,
right.
that's for sure.
No comment. Well, Rebecca, do you have anything you want to add before we wind it up here?
No, I think that's about it. And thank you guys for having me on. I really enjoyed tonight.
Well, thank you for coming on, because we did, and I know our listeners did too. And just about every time you and I get together and I hear you talk, I learn about 14 or 30 brand new things. And I admire that. You're sharp as a tack on a quail.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And I enjoy having somebody that wants to hear me talk about quail, because I've most of my friends are over it. So I'll come and talk to you about quail anytime.
We may very well be taking you up on that.
Yep,
Perfect.
absolutely.
Karen, Jeff, do you have any questions for Rebecca?
No, it was a great show.
It was. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Okay. Well, to all our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We hope you learned as much as we did. Like I said, it's always a pleasure to hear Rebecca talk about quail. So until next week, 2 weeks from now, be sure and join us 2 weeks from now for our next Poultry Keepers 360 Live. But if you want something to listen to weekly, check out the Poultry Keepers podcast. It comes out every Tuesday, bright and early at 12:01 a.m. So check it out. If you've not listened to it, you might just enjoy that too. Until then, we will talk to you folks later. Y'all have a good evening. Bye-bye, everyone.